And then part of his plea is to continue to cooperate in the future. So not only was this man a gangster, involved in 4 different deaths total from what we know, this man was also a stone cold rat, and the worst kind of rat. Because he didn't just snitch and fucking change his life like most. He snitched and then did another home invasion where someone got head tapped. He snitched and kept being a gangster. Stayed in the streets. Had Pooh Shiesty running the streets looking up to him as a fucking role model. Now he's wrapped up in a case with his son.
Imagine this. You're one of the hottest rappers to come out of Memphis. You just touched down from a 5-year bid, dropped a song called F2 First Day Out, and it shoots straight to number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100. The city is riding for you harder than ever. The streets feel like they're yours again. And then, in a matter of months, everything, and I mean everything, falls apart. Now we're here, talking about Pooh Shiesty's own father, his own father, getting exposed as a snitch, and not just anybody exposing him. We're talking about 1090 Jake, one of the most plugged-in voices in the streets, pulling up to Vlad TV and dropping the whole story on camera. No mercy, no filter, just the cold, hard details. And here's the wildest part. The same man who allegedly helped plan this whole thing, who allegedly printed the contract, drove from Memphis to Dallas and stood in that room while all of this went down, is now out on bond. We're talking about a $250,000 bond, $50,000, with a $25,000 cash deposit paid to the court. And now that he's out, he's speaking. He's got something to say. He wants the world to know his side of the story. But here's the thing that nobody is talking about, and this is exactly why you need to stay on this video until the very end, because 1090 Jake didn't just show up and say, oh yeah, the dad might snitch. No, Jake broke down a history. He laid out the receipts. He made it clear that this isn't just some new development. There's a pattern here, and that pattern has everything to do with why Pooh Shiesty's situation just went from bad to catastrophic. We're gonna break down exactly what 1090 Jake said, exactly what Lontrell Williams Sr. is accused of doing in that Dallas studio, exactly what he said after he bonded out, and why the streets are now looking at the whole Pooh Shiesty family different. Because this story goes deep into all of this. We gotta take a step back and remind people who Pooh Shiesty really is, because some of y'all might have just slid into this video without the full picture. Lontrell Donnell Williams Jr., that's Pooh Shiesty's government name, was born November 8th, 1999, in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis is a city that produces a certain kind of toughness. You don't come out of that city soft. And Pooh Shiesty came up in one of the rawest environments that city has to offer. He blew up around 2020, 2021. Back in Blood featuring Lil Durk became one of the biggest trap records of that era. He signed to Gucci Mane's 1017 Records and to Atlantic Records. He was on magazine covers. He was selling out shows. He was living the life that kids from Memphis dream about when they're staring at the ceiling at night. Then, the feds caught up with him. He caught a gun case, a federal weapons charge, and he ended up spending over 5 years behind bars. 5 years. Gone. Just like that. Most people would have come home broken. Pooh Shiesty came home and immediately got back to work. He dropped F2 First Day Out in December 2025. And that record hit differently. It was personal. It was hungry. It shot to number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100, which became his highest charting solo record ever. The streets welcomed him back with open arms. So, what does a man do when he's finally free after 5 years and has a hit record on the charts? Apparently, according to federal prosecutors, he orchestrates an armed robbery and kidnapping. And not just of anybody, of the same man who put him on, Gucci Mane. That's where everything falls apart. Alright, so let's talk about what the feds say happened. And I want to be very clear here, these are allegations. Everything is alleged at this point. Pooh Shiesty and everyone involved has pleaded not guilty. But the story that federal prosecutors laid out in court is absolutely wild. So let's walk through it piece by piece. January 10th, 2026. A recording studio in Dallas, Texas, according to the FBI, specifically Special Agent Hobbs, who testified at the detention hearing. Pooh Shiesty set up a meeting at the studio to discuss his contract with a man identified in court documents as Ard. Now, if you know anything about the rap game, you already know Ard is Roderick Davis. That's Gucci Mane. So Pooh Shiesty invites Gucci Mane, his label boss, the man who signed him to 1017 Records, to a studio meeting. On the surface, it looks like a regular business conversation. Maybe they're talking about new music. Maybe they're ironing out label details now that Pooh is home from prison. But according to the feds, that's not what this was at all. Once everyone was inside, Pooh Shiesty allegedly asked to have a private conversation with Gucci Mane and his own father, Lontrell Williams Sr., in the control room. Just the three of them. Away from security, away from cameras, in a back room. Then things allegedly got very ugly, very fast. Here's where the FBI testimony gets heavy. According to Special Agent Hobbs, an argument broke out between Pooh Shiesty and Gucci Mane, and then allegedly, Pooh Shiesty turned to Big 30, who was also in the studio, and told him to go get a bag. Big 30, whose real name is Rodney Wright Jr. Pooh Shiesty's longtime rap partner and close associate goes and gets the bag. And inside that bag, an AK-style pistol. According to investigators, Pooh Shiesty pulled out that AK-style pistol, pointed it directly at Gucci Mane, and demanded that he sign paperwork on the spot. Papers that would release Pooh Shiesty from his recording contract with 1017 Records. Think about that for a second. He allegedly pointed a gun at his own label boss and said, "Sign this or else." Gucci Mane, according to testimony, complied. He signed the paperwork. But it didn't stop there. After Gucci signed, Big 30 allegedly pulled out his phone and recorded Gucci Mane still at gunpoint, essentially making him verbally confirm, on camera, that he was releasing Pooh Shiesty from his contract. So now you've got a video of a man saying he's letting you go, while a gun is pointed at him. That's not a contract release, that's a confession under duress. And on top of all of that, witnesses say Pooh Shiesty himself allegedly took the jewelry directly out of Gucci Mane's ears, took his watch, took his chains. They robbed him. This wasn't just about the contract. Now the doors to the studio were allegedly barricaded. Security was blocked from getting inside. Gucci's people couldn't get to him. He was essentially trapped in there with a crew of armed men from Memphis who the feds say made the drive from Tennessee to Texas specifically to pull this off. When the dust settled, Gucci Mane walked out of that studio without his jewelry, without his dignity, and with a signed contract release that nobody really believes is gonna hold up in court. The U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Texas, Ryan Raywood, made it crystal clear at a press conference after the arrests. The victims in this case came to Dallas to conduct legitimate business, and they were met with firearms and violence. 9 people were arrested in connection with this. Pooh Shiesty, Big 30, and Lontrell Williams Sr., Pooh Shiesty's own father. Now this is where the story takes a turn that a lot of people weren't expecting, because when most people heard Pooh Shiesty got arrested, they assumed it was just the rapper and his crew. Business as usual in federal cases involving rappers. Nobody was expecting the daddy to be in the mix. But Lontrell Williams Sr. wasn't just standing on the sideline watching his son. According to federal prosecutors, he was an active participant in the planning of this entire operation. And the specific detail they keep hammering home is this. They say Lontrell Williams Sr. printed the contract. Think about what that means. Somebody had to type up that paperwork, the release forms that Gucci Mane was allegedly forced to sign at gunpoint. Somebody had to format it, print it out, and bring it to Dallas. And prosecutors are saying that person was Pooh Shiesty's dad. That's not just showing up and watching. That's not just being around like some co-defendants try to argue. That is allegedly contributing to the pre-planning of the operation. You don't print a contract by accident. You print a contract because you know what's coming. On top of that, prosecutors allege that Lontrell Williams Sr. traveled from Memphis to Dallas alongside the group. He didn't stumble into this situation. He made the trip. Now at the detention hearing, this was on April 3, 2026, prosecutors laid all of this out in front of a federal judge in Memphis, Tennessee. Williams Sr., Big 30, and 3 other defendants appeared in court that day. The judge ruled that prosecutors had probable cause to pursue the case against the group. But here's where it got interesting from a legal standpoint. Williams Sr. was initially granted a $250,000 bond with a $25,000 cash deposit. The judge considered his history and characteristics and decided he wasn't a danger to the community in the same way Pooh Shiesty was being held. Pooh Shiesty himself was denied bond entirely. The judge told him flat out, "I can't find any condition to offer that hasn't already been granted to you," referencing the fact that Pooh had allegedly committed this crime while he was on house arrest from his previous federal case. On house arrest, while a federal monitor was tracking his movements. That's how bold this allegedly was. But the dad, he got bond. $250K with a $25K cash deposit. The prosecutors immediately tried to fight it. They filed a motion to revoke his bond, arguing he was a flight risk. They got the bond stayed, meaning even though it was granted, it was on hold while a Texas judge could weigh in. Williams Sr. fired back through his legal team, arguing the government couldn't provide clear and convincing evidence that he was a danger to the community. He disputed his level of involvement, with his team suggesting that even if he was present in the studio, he at most stood by and let it happen, citing Judge Kristoff's own observations about his role. After weeks of back and forth, a Texas federal judge finally made the call. As of May 28, 2026, literally yesterday, the judge denied the government's request to revoke his bond. Lontrell Williams Sr. is now out. He's free pending trial. He has to remain in Texas and is on house arrest, but he is out of custody. And now, he's speaking. Okay, so Lontrell Williams Sr. is out. He's done his time in federal custody while the bond battle played out. And like a lot of people who find themselves in hot water with the feds, he's not sitting quiet. He wants to push his version of events. His legal position is essentially this: the government's case is weak. He says there's a significant gap between what the prosecutors are claiming and what the actual evidence shows. His new lawyer, John Helms, has been out front making the argument that Williams Sr. was not some mastermind of this operation. The argument from his side is that even if he was in that room, and they're not fully conceding that either being present doesn't make you a kidnapper, being in the building doesn't make you a robber. Even Judge Kristoff, the judge who first granted his bond, suggested that at most, Williams Sr. stood by and let it happen. His team is leaning on that hard. But let's keep it real with each other for a second, because the streets don't see it that way, and neither does 1090 Jake. Because when you drive from Memphis to Dallas with your son and a crew, when you allegedly print out the contract release forms, when you're in that back room, when all of this allegedly goes down, it's real hard to paint yourself as an innocent bystander who just happened to be there. And here's the part that has everybody in the streets talking. Because when WAC 100 sat down with Vlad TV, he revealed something that made this whole situation 10 times more complicated. He said that when Lontrell Williams Sr. got into the back of the squad car after his arrest, he allegedly started talking, right then and there. He allegedly told the feds, "Yeah, I knew y'all was coming. My inside people already told me y'all was on us. So I kind of expected y'all. I knew this was coming." Now think about that. The man allegedly confirmed that he had inside information about the federal investigation before the arrests, and then the prosecutors took that statement and used it against him at his own bond hearing. So while he's arguing in court that he's not a danger and should be released, the feds are sitting there with statements he made in the back of a patrol car that raise more questions than they answer. WAC 100 put it bluntly. He said this reminded him of Kasu's dad. For those who don't know, Kasu is a rapper whose own father testified against him in a federal case. WAC said he turns 50 this year, so 20 or 30 to him is a death sentence. And he wasn't wrong, because a man who's pushing 50 years old, staring down a potential 20 to 30 year federal sentence, with no more rap career for his son on the horizon, that man has every incentive in the world to start cooperating. Every single incentive. But the really wild stuff, that came from 1090 Jake. 1090 Jake is not a random commentator. He's not some guy sitting at his computer speculating. He is someone who has lived inside the system, who understands how federal cases work from the inside, and who has been proven accurate about this kind of information before. When Jake speaks on a situation like this, people in the streets pay attention. And when he sat down with Vlad on Vlad TV, he didn't hold back. The interview went viral almost immediately, and for good reason. Because Jake wasn't just talking about Pooh Shiesty's legal situation. He was connecting dots that a lot of people didn't even know existed. Let's start with the most explosive claim. Jake said that Lontrell Williams Sr. had already cooperated with federal authorities in previous cases before this one. Not now. Not just in response to this Dallas incident. Before, this wasn't the first time this man had allegedly provided information to law enforcement. Drake said insiders in the know had been aware of this for a long time, and that the dad had a history of cooperating with the feds that preceded this entire Gucci Mane situation. Now let that marinate. Because if that's true, if Pooh Shiesty's own father had already been cooperating with federal authorities in prior cases, then the question becomes, what does that mean for Pooh Shiesty's earlier federal weapons case? What does it mean for his associates?
What does it mean for the people around him who might not even know this information exists?
Jake also got into the mechanics of the robbery itself and made a point that a lot of people glossed over. He raised the question, if the whole goal of this operation was to get Pooh Shiesty out of his contract with 1017 Records, then why did they also rob Gucci Mane of his jewelry? Why take the chains? Why take the watch? Why rip the earrings out of his ears? Jake said, and this is key, that the robbery appeared to be personal. It wasn't just about a business dispute or a contract. Pooh Shiesty allegedly wanted Gucci Mane to feel something, to feel humiliated, to feel violated. Jake explained the emotional underpinning of it. Growing up listening to Gucci Mane, a lot of people, including Pooh Shiesty, saw him as a certain kind of figure. Somebody who was not to be played with. Somebody who carried himself like a gangster. Somebody who always said in his music, "You try me, I'm gonna smoke you." And yet here's Gucci Mane, allegedly crying in a studio in Dallas while someone takes the jewelry out of his ears. Allegedly teary-eyed. Jake said, if the goal was the contract, why take the jewelry? It's a fair question, because taking the jewelry turned a contract dispute, which is something that could potentially be argued in civil court, into an armed robbery, a kidnapping, a federal case. By adding the robbery on top of the forced contract signing, the crew allegedly turned what might have been a serious but more ambiguous situation into something prosecutors could charge as a full-blown coordinated criminal conspiracy. And then, Jake addressed the dad again. He made it very clear. The allegation that Lontrell Williams Sr. had already cooperated with the feds before this case is not something Jake took lightly. He wasn't just throwing out a rumor. He was presenting this as something that was known in certain circles. Something that the people closest to Pooh Shiesty's operation were starting to come to terms with. And the implication is terrifying if you're Pooh Shiesty or anyone in his camp. Because if your own father has a history of cooperating with federal authorities, and now your father is arrested alongside you in the same case, and your father just bonded out while you remain in a federal holding facility, what does that tell you? What does it tell the streets? It tells you that the man who raised you might be the most dangerous person in your case. Now let's zoom out a little, because this situation doesn't exist in a vacuum. There are multiple layers to this story that have the entire hip-hop community divided. First, let's talk about Gucci Mane, because ever since this story broke, Gucci Mane has been catching smoke from every direction. People in the streets have been calling him a rat, not because of anything he's been caught saying to the feds specifically, but because he appears to be cooperating with the prosecution. And in the court of public opinion, being a witness in a federal case against somebody from your own world comes with a price. When Gucci Mane made his first public appearance after the arrests at a halftime show for the Birmingham Stallions Game, fans in the crowd were literally screaming rat at him, on camera, in public, like the man couldn't even show up to an event without being reminded of what the streets think of him right now. And then he dropped a song called Crash Dummy. And if you listen to those lyrics, it's very clearly about Pooh Shiesty. He raps about someone coming into a room and dapping him up while plotting against him. He talks about signing paperwork and what that person did. He's basically putting the whole situation in a record. Now, a lot of people have different reactions to that. 50 Cent weighed in, Boosie Badazz weighed in, Uncle Murda, Rollo, even 6ix9ine, who never misses an opportunity to say something, hopped online and started running his mouth. Everybody had an opinion. But here's the reality check. Gucci Mane, regardless of what you think about how he's handling this publicly, was allegedly the victim in this case. He was allegedly held at gunpoint, had his jewelry taken, was allegedly forced to sign legal documents under duress. Whatever happened between him and Pooh Shiesty behind the scenes contractually, personally, business-wise, that doesn't justify what he allegedly went through in that studio. The complication is that in the world these people operate in, being the victim and cooperating with law enforcement are two very different things that carry very different weights. And even if Gucci Mane is morally justified in being a witness in his own kidnapping case, the streets have their own code, and that code doesn't make exceptions. Now let's talk about Pooh Shiesty himself. He is currently sitting in federal custody at Kaufman County, Texas. He was denied bond. The judge flat out told him she couldn't offer him any conditions that hadn't already been extended to him, because remember, he was allegedly on house arrest when this whole thing went down. A federal ankle monitor, active supervision, and allegedly he still went to Dallas and did all of this. If convicted, Pooh Shiesty is potentially looking at a life sentence. Let that sink in. A life sentence. He came home from a 5-year bid, made the biggest song of his career, had the whole city behind him, and now he could be looking at spending the rest of his natural life in federal prison. His attorney, Bradford Cohen, who has represented a long list of high-profile hip-hop clients, has stated that they're still evaluating the evidence and believes there are significant gaps in the government's case. The defense's argument centers on the claim that there is no physical evidence directly linking Pooh Shiesty to the crime. But with Gucci Mane cooperating, with security guards cooperating, with close associates cooperating, and if the allegations about the father are accurate, potentially his own father being able to provide testimony, the evidence picture becomes very complicated very fast. A jury trial for Pooh Shiesty and all 8 co-defendants is currently scheduled for July 6, 2026. Let's come back to Lontrell Williams Sr. now that we have the full context, because his decision to speak out after bonding out is significant in a way that goes beyond just he has something to say. When you are a federal defendant in an active criminal case with a trial date set, speaking publicly is a very risky move. Your lawyers generally advise you not to talk. The more you say in public, the more material prosecutors can potentially use against you or use to undermine your credibility if you ever take the stand. Every word you say publicly becomes potential ammunition for the other side. So the fact that Lontrell Williams Sr. is out here speaking tells us one of a few things. Option 1. He is supremely confident in his defense, and he genuinely believes the government's case against him is so weak that he has nothing to fear. His team has argued that even Judge Christoph, who reviewed all the evidence, said at most he stood by and let it happen. Maybe he really does believe the government can't make this stick. Option 2, he's speaking because he is trying to get ahead of a narrative, because the streets are already talking, because 1090 Jake went on Vlad TV and made serious allegations about his history of cooperation with federal authorities. When your name is in the mud like that publicly, staying quiet feels impossible even when your lawyers are begging you to stay quiet. Option 3, and this is the one people are afraid to say out loud, he's speaking because he has already made a deal, or is in the process of making one. And the speaking out is a way to set a public narrative that makes him seem like a victim of circumstances, an innocent bystander, a man who was there but wasn't really there, all while quietly negotiating with the government behind the scenes. I'm not saying that's what's happening, but that is the scenario that the people who know federal cases best, people like WAC 100, people like 1090 Jake, are openly discussing. And when people who have that level of experience with the federal system are connecting those dots, you have to take it seriously. Because here's the cold truth about federal cases: the cooperator almost always gets the best deal. The person who goes first, the person who provides the most useful information to the prosecution, the person who can help the government build the strongest possible case against the biggest target, that person walks away with a fraction of the sentence that everyone else gets. In federal cases, cooperation is the most powerful currency there is. Lontrell Williams Sr. is 49 years old, turning 50 this December. If he goes to trial, gets convicted, and a judge sentences him to 20 or 30 years, that is effectively a life sentence for a man his age. He will die in federal prison. That is not a hypothetical. That is a mathematical reality. So the question isn't really will he cooperate. The only question is whether he already has. Let's talk about how the culture is processing all of this, because the reaction out here has been all over the place, and that tells its own story. Some people are firmly in Pooh Shiesty's corner. They believe this whole case is being overblown. They believe Gucci Mane is exaggerating. They believe the feds are doing what feds do, coming down hard on rappers from Memphis with no mercy, and that sentiment is real. The history of federal prosecutions in hip-hop has genuinely been used as a weapon against black artists from low-income communities at a disproportionate rate. That is a legitimate concern. But then you've got people who look at the facts of this case and say, man, this is bad. And it is bad. Because this isn't a gun charge or a drug charge where the rapper was minding his business and got caught up. This is an alleged kidnapping and robbery of a specific person at a specific location on a specific date that was allegedly planned in advance, that allegedly involved the rapper's own father. The level of alleged premeditation here is what makes this different. And then there's the dad situation. Because regardless of what you think about Gucci Mane's role, regardless of what you think about how the federal government handles hip-hop cases, the idea that a man's own father might be the one who brings him down hits different. It's the kind of thing that changes how people see a whole family. Charlemagne the God even weighed in, saying he doesn't believe Pooh Shiesty would have gone this route if he had truly processed his time in federal prison the first time around. Like, did 5 years not show you how serious this is? Did the ankle monitor not feel like a warning? What goes through a man's mind when he's sitting on house arrest, freshly home, and allegedly makes the decision to drive to Dallas and do this? People who grew up listening to Pooh Shiesty are genuinely heartbroken. Back in Blood was an anthem. Shiesty Season was a moment. He gave Memphis something to celebrate at a time when the city needed it. And now all of that is in jeopardy, not just because of what Pooh allegedly did, but because of the choices of the people around him, including, allegedly, the man who raised him. This story is far from over, and you already know we're going to be right here covering every single development as it comes. If you made it this far in Real Ones, always do make sure you hit that subscribe button because the July trial is going to be something else entirely, and you do not want to miss that breakdown. Drop in the comments, do you think Pooh Shiesty's dad is going to cooperate with the feds? And do you think there's any defense that gets Pooh Shiesty out of this? Because personally, looking at what's been laid out in that courtroom, I think the road ahead is incredibly steep. As always, stay informed, stay locked in, and I'll see you in the next one.